Welcome to The Megyn Kelly Show, your home for open, honest, and provocative conversations. Hey everyone, I'm Megyn Kelly. Welcome to The Megyn Kelly Show. We have a big show for you today. In just a bit later, we're going to be joined by Katie Herzog. She's back with us to talk about some of her latest reporting on how woke ideology is spreading in the medical industry amongst MDs. That's not good. But joining me first for her first exclusive interview is Shelly Ross. She's a former executive producer at ABC News and CBS News who has publicly accused anchor Chris Cuomo of CNN of sexually harassing her during both of their time at ABC News. Shelly, great to have you here. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So I thought it was fascinating that you came out with this and in a New York Times op-ed and just were given the chance to tell your story. And I did wonder whether the New York Times was the first one you went to or whether anybody else had passed on the opportunity to tell this story. Can I start with that?
Sure. I actually, earlier, a year before, thought, let me see what this looks like. And there was one of the magazines had a first-person story that was very, very moving. And I contacted them and was in just a half a discussion. And then came all of the harassment against Asians. And I thought, this is not a time to talk about sexual harassment in the workplace. This is a time to talk about harassment of Asian people because of the pandemic. And so it was a very brief, and I said, I'm going to end this, this dialogue. I'm going to withdraw, everything because I think there's a more important dialogue to have.
Yeah.
And that was just a very quick toe in the water. Nothing, I was, it was just sort of a, what do you think?
So how long were you his EP at ABC News?
Well, I was first he was a sort of a floating network correspondent. And so I was EP at Good Morning America for 5.5 years. Mm-hmm. And he came to ABC, I don't know what date, but somewhere in that time frame. So I put him on the air and assigned him stories out of a pool of correspondents. And he was a legal correspondent. So I had him, for instance, covering the Martha Stewart trial, if that gives you a time frame.
Mm-hmm.
And he was on Good Morning America quite a bit. And then in 2004, I took over Primetime Live. And when I took over Primetime Live, it had gone through a lot of ups and downs. It had been merged with 2020 and then unmerged with 2020. And it was, magazine shows were sort of shrinking and trying to redefine themselves. And I came into Primetime Live and there were 4 anchors: Diane Sawyer, Cynthia McFadden, John Quinones, and Chris Cuomo.
Mm-hmm. So he was one of your anchors and you were his executive producer for how long? A couple years?
No, it was about a little less than a year.
Okay. And what was his character like prior to the incident that we're going to get into? How did you, know him? What did you think of him?
Well, he was a former Fox guy. He was a Roger Ailes discovery, interestingly enough. And he came to ABC, and he had a big personality. He was, attractive looking on air, but he was, had the personality that we've seen of a frat boy. He was a guy's guy, called people buddy, and he was he was younger and arrogant. He knew it all and didn't want anybody. He didn't want anybody's advice. He didn't want anybody's direction, and he certainly didn't want anyone to touch the first draft of his script.
Right. And when you're at network television, they do. I mean, it's not like cable at all. Having worked in both industries, I can say the executive producers, the producers are much more involved in the final product at the broadcast level than on cable. And I'm not surprised to learn that even in the broadcast world, Mr. Chris Cuomo didn't think anybody should be touching his work. Even somebody who is a seasoned executive producer like you, there's a reason you ran GMA for almost 6 years. Okay, so that was the situation.
I was at ABC News for 17 years.
Yeah. Yep.
So, and I came up the ladder on merit, on breaking a lot of stories, winning a lot of awards. So I was respected. And it was interesting to have somebody show disrespect.
So that is a form of disrespect early on, but then you were no longer his executive producer. And take
Correct.
us to the night that you were at this bar on the Upper West Side. What were you all going there for?
There was a going away party. I had moved on to the entertainment side of ABC. And I had just finished producing, I don't know if you remember, David Blaine's Lincoln Center 2-hour live special where he lived in a bubble for a week and he went for the breath hold world record. And I had produced that special, but someone from ABC was leaving Primetime Live and had invited me to the going away party. Now, I made it a habit not to go. I did anything more than drop in to a going away party. I always felt that people's arrivals should be celebrated and not, but I would always be up for a respectful toast. I'd be there for the toast and wish them luck in the next chapter and leave. I had no desire to, spend a night drinking with people who worked for me. I was the boss. I felt that was not appropriate.
Right.
So, but I was invited and I was honored to be invited because I wasn't there anymore. And I thought I would just drop in, have a quick toast, meet my husband there because we were driving back to Connecticut from Manhattan together. So I thought we'd meet there. He usually would just pick me up, outside the building. But I thought, let's meet here and then we can go together, go home.
So you go into the bar and Chris Cuomo sees you, and what happens?
He walked right into the bar, walked right over to me, gave me a bear hug, slipped one hand down my body to my buttocks, and squeezed really hard on my cheek while saying, I can do this to you now that you're no longer my boss. And I pushed him away and said, no, you can't. And as I pushed him away and stepped back, it revealed that my husband was sitting on a very low ottoman, which you couldn't see him. While I was talking to people I worked with, he was just sitting there drinking a Diet Coke, waiting for to leave. He didn't know anybody. And So he saw everything. It was right
Mm-hmm.
in front of him,
Mm-hmm. And
maybe
can I
even
ask you,
eye level.
at this moment, here's this guy who's, an anchor, a talent at the network. You're in a very well respected position there. You've been there almost 20 years. And what goes through your head as this guy has the nerve to squeeze your ass?
It was belittling. It was clearly a power trip. It to make me feel, you're no longer my boss. I can do anything I want with you. He knew something in his head said he couldn't do that when I was his boss. Maybe he thought he would get, I would fire him or something. But it was meant to diminish. Chris Cuomo's over 6 feet tall. I'm 5'2". I'm under 100 pounds, and it was it was overpowering, and I certainly didn't like it.
To me, I feel like anyone who is that brazen with a female work colleague, especially one who had just been above them on the power totem pole, must have done it before. That doesn't sound like somebody who's experimenting with that kind of behavior for the first time. What do you think?
I really don't know. I didn't discuss it, as you know, until now. So it's not like I was, talking to everybody at work and that it was like the buzz. And I just left, went home, and I didn't report it.
Did you talk
And
to anybody about it there? Did you go to like a colleague and say, holy cow?
I mentioned it to, a close colleague I had moved on and it was at prime time, but I called somebody that I had remained close to at Good Morning America, one of the senior producers, and said, because people who knew that he was just more of this arrogant frat boy personality. And I said, you won't believe what happened. And it's not, so I talked to a friend at the time, and just really talked to my husband about it. And my husband has always said, and it's interesting, I heard from another, when the editorial was published, I heard from Brian Rooney, who was an ABC correspondent. And he said to me, he was the first person who called early in the morning and said, Shelly, I think there are two kinds of men in the workplace. One who behaves like Chris Cuomo, and the other cannot fathom ever behaving like that.
Yeah. Mm.
He said, I can't imagine, manhandling one of my female colleagues. And my husband always said that he would like read about sexual harassment, and he was, a boss who hired lots of women and lots of women vice presidents. He just could never believe. He's like, what am I, the nerd? I mean, I don't get it. I don't get how people.
He's the gentleman. He's a normal man. A normal man doesn't behave like this at the office.
No.
My husband, too, is the CEO of a company for a long time, would never dream of behaving this way. I think about my pal Janice Dean, married to a firefighter. He's around a lot of guys with a lot of testosterone. Never. That most men do not behave like this. But Chris Cuomo and as we now know, his brother Andrew seemed to behave differently and look at women differently. And your op-ed was very well timed because not only did Chris defend his brother Andrew, we now know, but was actively involved in trying to diminish the women who accused him. And people said, it's his brother. And I said, no, you advise your brother as a brother. You call him after hours and say, brother, I'm here for you. Come over, let's have a beer. You don't actively join the strategy sessions trying to tear down the women as just cancel culture warriors. And he's been given a total pass for it by CNN.
Well, that was the reason. It wasn't the timing. That's the timing I selected. I got a lot of pushback on social media. Like, why did I wait 16 years? Well, I didn't wait 16 years. I wasn't lying in wait. I just had something to say now. And what I had to say after 40 years of experiencing and advocating against harassment in the workplace, I saw a moment where people were being held accountable as the enablers. I wrote about Chris Cuomo in this editorial, not just to say he was my sexual harasser. I wrote about him really because he was Andrew Cuomo's enabler.
Mm-hmm.
And Andrew Cuomo, when women started to come forward from accuser number one, Andrew Cuomo wrapped himself in this protective shield of a crisis management team that he called his inner circle. And his inner circle were people who used to be his chief of staff, people who had real jobs in, outside of government. And they came back to help him manage this crisis and work with Andrew Cuomo's paid staff. But the inner circle was not paid. They were not government employees, so they could operate in any way they wanted, and they were not accountable to the taxpayers. And some of them literally, their first reaction was, let's have a smear campaign against accuser number one.
Lindsey Boylan.
I carefully read the AG's report, which was not just one volume. There are 3 volumes of evidence, and I read every email, every phone call, every spreadsheet of everything that they were doing, because I wanted to make sure if I called somebody out as an enabler, that they really were. And Chris Cuomo actually came in, and he may have come in before, but the evidence proves that Chris Cuomo actively came into the inner circle at the time of accuser number 2. And that's when he went from being copied on emails to writing the emails to leading. This is what Andrew must say right away. And he must address this. And it was a strategy. And the strategy with accuser number 2, which now the New York Times was on to, the strategy, Charlotte Bennett, was accuser number 1 backfired when we launched a smear campaign. So let's be really nice to accuser number 2. Let's make sure we say she is a valued member of the team. But it's all a con game to them. They don't really know. We'll say we'll smear this one. We'll be nice to this one. It's just like nobody's being treated like a victim coming
Oh, no one
forward.
gives a damn whether Andrew Cuomo actually did it.
They're being managed. And so the strategy for Charlotte Bennett is now say she's a valued member of the team. And this is what, Chris is promoting. But will still deny their claims. Well, denying that there was ever sexual, it's calling them a liar.
Mm-hmm.
It's saying you're a liar. Whether you make it generic, you're discounting what these women are saying.
Of
and
course.
Chris Cuomo, and his whole thing, then he's, again, I apologized for it. Well, there's just so much you can apologize. These are big ethics breaches. Here's my, and he played, you can understand, I'm a brother and my family comes first. And everybody loved that. And that seemed to satisfy everyone. But I wanted to write about accountability because there was another option.
Right. Don't sit in the anger chair with your conflict. And can I just add to that?
It's really
what he did. Let me just play this, Shelly. Stand by. Because what he did was he advised him without disclosing it and then went in the anchor chair night after night. And only when he got outed, he was outed as having advised Andrew Cuomo, did he come on the air and then try to lecture us on how deeply he cares about women and sexual harassment. Here is that soundbite. It's number one for my team.
You're straight with me, I'll be straight with you. Obviously, I'm aware of what's going on with my brother. And obviously, I cannot cover it because he is my brother. Now, of course, CNN has to cover it. They have covered it extensively, and they will continue to do so. I have always cared very deeply about these issues, and profoundly so. I just wanted to tell you that.
He cares very deeply about sexual harassment, profoundly so. Your reaction when you saw that?
Well, I knew he was lying. I knew he was lying, and that he was a good liar. He was a convincing liar. And that was, I believe it was March 1st. And that's when I sat down and really thought, I want to see what, if I wrote something about accountability, I want to see what it would look like. So I wrote my first draft after he said that. And
would he take any real accountability, any responsibility? Because you tell me, Shelly, I mean, you, in your New York Times op-ed, you print his written apology to you after that night. He saw your husband. He knew he had stepped in it. He said, I can do this now that you're no longer my boss. And you said, no, you can't. So he knows he stepped in it. And you printed his apology email to you. This is back on June 1st, 2005 at 6:30 p.m. You can look it up online if you want to read it yourself. It says, now that I think of it, he writes to you, I'm ashamed, though my hearty greeting was a function of being glad to see you. And he goes on to say something about Christian Slater just got in trouble for this, although he had negative intent, and I didn't. He says, so pass along my apology to your very good husband, right? The apology is to your husband. And I apologize to you as well, he adds on afterward, for even putting you in such a position. Next time I will remember the lesson, no matter how happy I am to see you. So he was going to remember the lesson. You tell me what you thought about that, quote, apology and whether it was sincere.
There's nothing sincere about that apology. That Chris Cuomo is a lawyer, and that to me felt like an apology to my husband because he was embarrassed. It felt, there's one other sentence in there that I would, as a husband, I would have been upset seeing my wife patted as such. Well, as a lawyer, he's memorializing a false narrative. I was not patted. I was groped, grabbed. That a pat is quite a different experience. And talking about his intent, that, he had pure intent. What's interesting is that's gaslighting. That is making the reader of that assume, Christian Slater had negative intent, and he had pure intent. I don't know that he's right about Christian Slater. I don't know what his intent was. And, and I don't know what Chris Cuomo's intent was. I think his intent was to belittle his former boss and to exercise some, jungle tribal, I'm the king of the jungle thing over a female boss. Talking about intent, if you really want to apologize to somebody, is really awkward.
Right.
And then to bring up Christian Slater. So Christian Slater had been arrested the day before Chris Cuomo groped me. And it was all over the New York tabloids. It was the water cooler story of the day. Can you imagine? And up until that point, none of us knew that you could be arrested for grabbing a woman's butt in that way.
Yeah. And Christian Slater was drunk and he grabbed some woman's behind on the street in New York and got arrested.
But he got arrested. And we all learned it was water cooler. Everybody was talking about it the next day. That we all learned it's a third degree sexual assault. And I just thought, whoa, like who knew that? I certainly didn't feel like I was sexually assaulted, but under the law, it's a chargeable offense.
That's
so
right.
If Chris Cuomo knew that, why did he do it?
And you're right to point out the size differential between the two of you, because that also, a man like that understands the physical advantage he has over a woman like you, though he didn't have the power advantage at ABC over you. And there's no question in my mind that was a factor in his behavior. I can tell you, and you know this too, and every woman listening to this and man knows, we've all gone to work functions where we are overjoyed to see somebody that we haven't seen in a week or more. And you couldn't be more delighted. And we don't grab their backsides and squeeze it in front of a bunch of work colleagues. He was absolutely trying to diminish you. I 100% agree with this. And I've been down this road enough times to know. And that's the man who reared his ugly head when his brother got caught doing that same stuff to women who worked for him. His first instinct was not, let's find out whether this is a problem and these women actually have an issue and my brother maybe has an issue. It was get him. Get them. And CNN has failed to reconcile with the reality of the man they have sitting in that anchor chair at 9 p.m. Instead, they've sicked him on women on his staff and within the organization who are now one by one coming out, talking about his bully behavior. And we'll get to the latest one right after this quick break. So much still to go over with Shelly, former executive producer at ABC, also executive at ABC, accusing Chris Cuomo of sexually harassing her. Up next, we'll get to some of what I just mentioned, along with the Me Too reckoning and our own shared history when it comes to Roger Ailes. Megyn Kelly Show. Joining me today is Shelly Ross. She's a former executive producer at ABC, 17 years she was there, and CBS executive producer as well, who has accused CNN's Chris Cuomo of sexually harassing her when they were both at ABC back in 2005. So let me just jump back to that 2005 moment, and he sent you that email. Shelly, did you respond to that email either with your own email or in person?
No. And I really think if you are friends, and I've had, plenty of friends who have said things and colleagues said things that were wrong, got a little too, handsy, having a drink. And it was different. It was people who respected me and then said, did I really say that last night? Oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. And it's different when somebody really is your friend. And if they do something overboard, if they're happy to see you, I think you don't get like a legal note of apology to your husband.
Mm-hmm.
You get like a phone call that says, oh, I'm so embarrassed. I don't know why I was such a knucklehead.
Mm-hmm. Or you walk into somebody's office. He walks into your office. That's the more likely reasonable scenario, and say, oh my God, please forgive me. What a dope. But this was a CYA because he recognized he had offended you. He'd done it in front of witnesses and it could come back to haunt him.
Yes.
I've got to ask you about your husband, David, because your poor husband must have been like,
I know.
What on earth?
Well, my husband we were both shocked. I have to say, we just left. We don't even remember, I remember my husband standing up and looking at him. Oh. And I remember looking at Chris, and I'm sure something was said, and we just left. Neither of us remember anything but getting out of that room very quickly and heading home. It was
sure. Well, look, some people online are like, why didn't your husband deck him? It's like, okay, have you seen Chris Cuomo with his weird steroid-infused muscles putting out videotape of himself about threatening to beat up everybody? I mean, please. And David was a gentleman. He got his wife out of there, and you did the right thing.
Well, it's so funny because some of the backlash and a lot of the social media comments of well, what about the husband? How could he just sit there? Why didn't he do something? And my poor husband looked at me the other day and said, when did I become the bad guy?
No, he's
Chris
not the bad guy.
Chris Cuomo's the bad guy. My husband's never lifted his hand or resorted to violence in his entire life, nor would he.
Nor should he have been put in that position to begin with. I'll note for the record, I don't know that it's a fact Chris Cuomo has taken steroids. It just looks like that to me. I want to ask you this. So you come out with this op-ed, and one of the things you add, and you felt it was important to add, was that you don't want to see Chris Cuomo fired from his job at CNN.
Correct.
I had Tucker Carlson on the show the other week, and I disagreed with you because I think he's had a pattern of bullying, dishonest behavior. But why don't you want to see him fired?
I've been in this fight for equality in the way women and men are treated in the workplace. It's 40 years now, and nothing's worked. Calling lawyers didn't work. Corporate training for sexual harassment hasn't worked. For Time's Up, where people were getting fired, within 36 hours. For some deserved it because they were really sexually assaulting women, and things that you could go to jail for. Corporations were clearing them out. But 4 years of Time's Up didn't change anything. And then we have, things happening at ABC and where they're refusing investigations and outside investigators, and Andrew Cuomo with this. And I realize the discussion has to move to the enablers. At ABC, it's clear they all knew what was going on.
Well, why do you say that? Because you didn't report it. I mean, you only mentioned it to another
No,
colleague.
not me. I'm saying the recent issues.
Okay.
No, nobody knew about me. And again, I wouldn't have called this. I'd call for what happened to me.
Yeah. There was a report. I should clarify. There was a report about a GMA producer who allegedly harassed some women.
No,
He's denied it.
There's lawsuits. There are multiple lawsuits against somebody who I knew and was quite fond of. And I actually wrote something like, when the harasser in the headlines is somebody you adore. That's happening to a lot of us, that, that we didn't know something was going on. It's, but there were, women at ABC reporting things, hostile environments and,
No, we've seen it across the board, is your point. We've certainly seen it at CBS, and on and Fox.
Yeah, and I just thought Time's Up didn't work. Matt, the shame of the public shaming of Matt Lauer and Charlie Rose, that didn't change anything. So I want to move it forward. I just want to see it stop. I want to see it changed. So I proposed that CNN, not take any disciplinary action against Chris Cuomo, but instead give him an assignment to study and report on what sexual harassment is in the workplace, what gender bias is, and have him go on a journey and then do town meetings with experts and women. And
who would watch that? I don't want to see him do that. That would be so insincere.
Oh no, you only do it if it's sincere.
Yeah,
you can't. He can't fake it.
He hasn't stopped his bullying behavior. The latest report.
I think that I like to think that everybody can have a second chance, that everybody can be rehabilitated, that everybody can be educated. I really go back to the great Desmond Tutu. And what could have been worse than taking a country through the end of apartheid, where people were murdered because of the color of their skin? And he came up with a truth and reconciliation plan that everybody, you can't hide it. You can't lie anymore. You can't spin it anymore. Mm-hmm. Everybody has to come forward and tell the truth about what happened, and then you reconcile.
Well, that would have to require,
as
you say, sincerity and a true change of spots. And that's just not what we're seeing with him at all. From what he did to you, to the lies he's told on the air about his COVID recovery, coming out of the basement, pretending that was his first time out, which was a lie, pretending he hadn't already been expressed.
There's been a series of that.
And then let me just get to this. I don't want to lose Melanie Buck. Okay, this is a female executive producer of his at CNN. You were at ABC, so I could almost see Jeff Zucker saying, okay, that was years before he came to me. This is a woman who is at CNN, the female producer of his show, Cuomo Primetime, who reportedly, this is a Page 6 report, begged to leave his show after they clashed over significant differences. She felt threatened by him, is the report. She asked to be removed from him because she couldn't work with him anymore. They moved her over. Now she's going to be working on CNN Plus, which I think is just their digital property. But it doesn't escape me, Shelly, that Melanie, so she has a clash with him. She feels threatened by him. She's got to move to the digital side, as opposed to this primetime post where she's the executive producer. It's a much more powerful role, as you well know. The woman always gets moved off. That's what we saw with Andrew Cuomo too.
Yes. Totally.
I'm
And
sick of it. I want to
it's-
see him pay a price, not her.
Well, in addressing her, I read the page 6 item. I don't put a lot into page 6 because I know that they have written many items that were all out just lies
No,
about
that's
me.
true too.
And they
I've been there too. I have to admit.
They have one source. So now the only interesting thing is that she hasn't denied it.
She gave a statement on the record. She did give a statement on the record.
You know, when
She said,
wasn't
we ultimately had
allowed-
significant differences. I asked to leave the show. I've moved on. I'm looking forward to my latest role with CNN Plus. I spent 2 years as an EP on his show. I'm proud to have left it at number 1 at CNN. There's only so much you can say when you're still working for the company. That's obvious.
Yeah, I feel that if it's true, I feel like she must be under so much pressure and terrified about her job and everything. This can't be, coming forward is not for the faint-hearted.
Mm-hmm.
There are dark forces that are an invisible inner circle, people with trying to protect the company. It's it really, I feel really scared for her.
Well, and here's the reality. Here's the reality at CNN. You've got Jeff Zucker, who did not fire Jeffrey Toobin for masturbating on the air while on a New Yorker Zoom call, but he was employed at CNN.
Yes.
Did not fire him. He did not get rid of Don Lemon, who's been credibly accused, though Don denies it, with a third-party independent witness, a guy who worked with the accuser of sexually assaulting a man in a bar. You've got this against Chris Cuomo, you plus this executive producer. I personally know somebody at CNN who I know has complained about his bully tactics. It goes on and on. So I understand one incident here or there. And I also understand people do like to accuse famous people of things that they haven't necessarily done. But this is a pattern. And I really do wonder about the women inside of CNN and whether they feel safe working around this guy and the other guys.
I also feel badly for Brian Stelter, who has been totally compromised. He is the chief media critic. He has a great resume. He really is a good reporter. And he said nothing about it. And Brian Stelter knows me. He knows the position of authority I held at, multiple networks. He's interviewed me. He's actually done he wrote a New York Times feature about me when I took over the CBS Early Show. And I wrote an editorial that was published in the New York Times that literally went viral. I've seen it picked up as far away as the Taipei Times. It was trending on Twitter. Twitter burn up. And these are all things that are Brian Stelter's beat.
Did he not report on this at all?
No. And he came under fire for not reporting on it. But that where Brian Stelter is compromised is I read over the weekend when the House bill was going into the wee hours of the morning. And Brian Stelter did a column how CNN and MSNBC were live with the coverage for, in Congress as it, 1 o'clock in the morning, midnight. And, even as early as 11 o'clock, he wrote that Fox News had programming on tape. Well, I think that Brian Stelter lost his moral authority to quote on what other networks cover and choose to cover and don't cover.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well,
You know, how can
I
he
would make the case
criticize?
that happened a long time prior to your op-ed, but I see your point, and it's too convenient because if this had been an accusation against Tucker Carlson, Brian Kilmeade, Brett Baer, any of these guys at Fox, you can guarantee Brian Stelter would have found his pen and it would have been written about. Stand by, Shelly. I want to pick it up with you in just 1 minute. Going to squeeze in a quick break. Welcome back to the Megyn Kelly Show. Joining me today, Shelly Ross, a former executive producer for many, many years at ABC News and at CBS News, who has accused CNN's Chris Cuomo of sexually harassing her back in their ABC days together. So let me ask you this. Given what we were just talking about, what do you think the women at CNN, if there are other women who have had trouble with Chris Cuomo or anybody else, but since we're talking about Cuomo, we'll leave it on him. How can they complain, right? So when they have a management that doesn't seem too interested in pushing back on this kind of behavior.
They can't. They can't complain because the person in charge has made it clear that Chris Cuomo can do anything he wants with impunity. So how can he complain? How can anybody complain without women are already terrified to come forward, and you don't want to get anybody in trouble on one hand, and on the other hand, you're sort of, if you've been in the workplace any period of time, it's going to reflect badly on you. It's like the pendulum has swung us back into the dark ages, where it's like where women, which is no longer allowed to happen, used to be questioned if they were reported a rape. Well, what were you wearing? Like, they invited it.
Mm-hmm.
And even in his most recent comment to the New York Times, Chris Cuomo, when the New York Times called him for a response, said, as Shelly acknowledges, our interaction was not of a sexual nature. Well, what I want to say is there was never our interaction. He's already gaslighting everybody in that response.
Right, like you were a willing participant.
I was not a participant. He walked into a room and grabbed me. This is not our interaction. So he is very clever about parsing words, and like I was some kind of a part of that.
As opposed to
women
a victim
are
of his behavior. Wait, let me just stand you by. Apologies. Got to pay the bills, so I do squeeze in a break. We're going to come right back with Shelly. I will say this. If you are a woman and you have a complaint, you can email me. Email me at devilmaycare questions with the plural. My executive producer is one who reads those, at devilmaycaremedia.com. More with Shelly Ross right after this. Welcome back to the Megyn Kelly Show. Joining me today is Shelly Ross. She's a former executive producer at ABC and CBS who's accused CNN's Chris Cuomo of sexually harassing her back in 2005 when they were at ABC News. Shelly, that sadly was not your first foray into the world of sexual harassment.
No.
And
No.
you came out publicly back in 2016 and told your story about being harassed by Roger Ailes. And as the world now knows, I was also harassed by him very young in my career. So can we just spend a minute on that? What did he do? He proposed a sexual relationship with you when you were young in your career?
Oh, this was an interview for my first network job. And he had, offered we had the job interview in person in LA, and it just went great. And and he offered me the job. And I accepted it and said to call business affairs. And I got a hold of, we put everything in motion. And then he asked for a second meeting the following day. He was still in town and we would have a lunch. And in the second meeting, very early on, he looked at me and said, "How long have you known you were sexy?" And I was so shocked and embarrassed that I literally couldn't make eye contact, and I literally put my head down, and I remember staring at my feet and saying, this is really embarrassing. And he continued. And I tried to change the subject. I tried to, if you say to somebody, this is really embarrassing, I'd like to talk about the show, you're sending a message back that you're embarrassed and you're not interested. But he wanted to tell me his philosophy, that how he believed in loyalty and career advancement, and how he felt having, and he used the word sexual alliance. If we would have a sexual alliance, it would be amazing for both of our careers. Both of us would benefit.
What year was this, would you say?
This was 1981. This is 40 years ago.
Wow.
40 years ago, which is unbelievable. And 40 years ago, there was no Me Too movement. You were there thinking that, I knew sexual harassment existed. I hadn't really experienced it in such a way. So I really, he said, think about it. I'm here at this hotel over, and call me and let me know. And I just spoke. I said, I don't even know you. You don't even know me. We don't even know if we would like each other. I didn't know what to say.
Right.
And he said, oh, well, if it's just that you need time to get to know me, I can wait. And I said, well, what does that mean? You'll come into my office once a week, once a month, and say, are you ready yet? And I could never work under that kind of pressure. And I went and called a lawyer, and we'll just fast forward to that lawyer, contacted NBC's lawyers, and all hell broke loose in Roger Ailes' world. And he was put on a conference call with three of the biggest lawyers in entertainment business, who, and the one thing about Roger is he never denied it. When they confronted him with this, and he withdrew the job offer, by the way, at the end of the second meeting. And, his reaction to these three lawyers calling him out on this was, hey guys, I'm single. He said, well, that means nothing in this conversation. And whatever they said or did, at the time, this is how, 40 years ago, how it was handled was, we have to make this scandal go away. And the best way to do it is to Roger to apologize.
Yeah.
And get her to take the job offer.
And just jumping forward, because I don't have that much time with you, and there's so much
then
I
it goes away.
This. So he apologized, and you guys went on to have a good relationship, and I can relate to, well, not the apology, but to the moving on and finding a way to have a good relationship. But it is interesting to me because some 25 years later, I would find myself in an office with Roger Ailes asking me about being sexy, being lectured to on the value of loyalty, which led to a months-long campaign to try to get me into bed, and ultimately him grabbing me and trying to shove his tongue down my throat. And here's what I wanted to get your reaction to, Shelly. I've never asked anybody
to hear this because I really thought that he would be so scared by these three NBC lawyers, and putting the fear of God in him, that I really thought I was the first and the last.
But let me tell you something.
I was going to go through the workplace and change
here's what I don't like.
One at a time.
You did what you could do. You went to a lawyer. You stood up for yourself. In no world, once I found out that Roger was a serial harasser, I can speak for my pal Janice Dean on this, who was also one of his targets. In no world did I ever look at you or Lori Loon or any woman who I found out later had come before me and blame the woman. Never. Women have been dealing with this for a long, long time, trying to navigate it as best they could against a system that was not on their side. Yeah. And this is one of my objections to the movie Bombshell, where they created a fictional character played by Margot Robbie, who at the end of the movie blamed her harassment not on Roger Ailes, but on me. And I wondered what your thought was on this weird Hollywood take that, somehow it always gets back to the women, especially in media. It's always our fault. There's always a way of blaming the woman.
Well, nobody is to blame for Roger Ailes, and I told him that. And when I made a decision to go public, it was really to show that this was such a, I was probably in 1981, I had to be at least among the first. And that, so many people were judgmental of Lori Loon. Lori Loon made, a Monica Lewinsky mistake, as a young girl, impressionable girl. She went along with it and literally had a breakdown over it. That's where it leads. It never leads to a good place. Mm-mm. And nobody, she was exploited as a young girl. That's why, I want to say something. I have friends in the military, and in the military, they court-martial you for this. Mm-hmm. The military has strictest rules. It's called fraternization. And you can't get romantically involved within the chain of your command because it destroys military readiness. It destroys the team. For all the reasons in the civilian world, it destroys everything as well. The military is smart enough to actually court-martial you over it. No questions. I mean, you go to a trial, but that's it. You're kicked out. There's a reason this is not allowed. Media. Our national security, they think that if people were allowed to fraternize, that our national security would be impaired. It's that serious.
I mean, it's complicated because a lot of people meet their spouses at work. I mean, maybe less so in today's day.
That's not in the chain of command.
That's right. But you got like the head of ABC with Bob Iger.
Plenty of producers.
We could go down the line.
Plenty of producers who met and married and had lived happily ever after and had babies. And there's one, and I think that that's a problem. I think that Bob Iger, being married and then finding his true love, and having her stay there, and Les Moonves, and David Weston, and Jeff Zucker.
And Roger Ailes.
And Roger Ailes. I think, it's more accepted when they get married, and it does happen. But I think they're clearly there were lines crossed on the way to that happy marriage. So, I'm not the judge and jury, but I think it should be, if it's true love, then one person has to leave.
Last question.
The King of England stepped down, right?
Right. Now we're going back. I look at your career. You've accomplished so much. And then I see, you wound up leaving all, of course, the necessary tabloid reports come out that about some toxic relationship around you or bully culture. I've seen it happen to virtually every woman who leaves our industry, from you, me, Lara Logan, Barbara Fedida just got taken down. It's like they won't let you leave without destroying you. Do you know what I mean? And I wonder why you think our business is so disgusting to women in particular. And whether, I know you're a new grandmother now, whether this is ever an industry you could recommend to your little granddaughter.
Well, I wouldn't recommend the industry for other reasons and more editorial, what it's become and how I would recommend journalism, real journalism, to my granddaughter. And all this, the work I'm doing is really for future generations of women, and having this dialogue. And so many people, by the social media comments I've gotten, really still don't understand. It's like, what's the big deal? No, I wasn't traumatized by Chris Cuomo's actions. But I was belittled, and it's that's just one of many things that went on to belittle female bosses. And I took, when I was at ABC, I took income revenue from $19 million when I got to Good Morning America to nearly $100 million. In 5.5 years. That's the gift that keeps on giving. I closed the gap with the competitors. We won awards. I turned Good Morning America into, from a show where everybody went home at 6:00 at night to a 24/7 news operation that really had tremendous muscle. I brought Charlie Gibson back and teamed him with Diane Sawyer and gave it a real news heft. Went to a year before we went through 9/11 and anthrax attacks and wars. And I did a lot. And when they can't attack you on your talent, I worked 5 times as hard as anybody else there and put in all the hours. When you're fixing a show while you still have one on the air, when I got the first couple years were 18-hour days.
Of course.
And when they can't, and I wasn't a perfect boss. I mean,
no one is. No,
there wasn't. I was
built
never
into the
a
cake.
Bully.
That's the thing. Every article people see about what it's so often about a female boss or a female powerful person in our industry. You remember, no one's a perfect boss. You don't think you could write a toxic or bully or whatever they come at you with. You could write all of that stuff about any male in the industry. But the pattern in news is once you get pushed out, you don't just get pushed out. They destroy you. I talked about it with Lara Logan.
Yeah.
It's disgusting. Yeah. And people need to be aware that it's a dynamic by these powerful media organizations that continue to do it with impunity. They continue to do it as they try to lecture the rest of us on morality. I got to go. I'll give you a quick last word.
No, Lara Logan is my hero. Yes. And she got caught up in a bad story because CBS, which owned the publishing company that did that book, had her do a book that was a conflict of interest in the first place.
Yeah, no, Laura, we had her on the show and it was a great exchange, and it was a
She's
good
my
expose
hero.
of what this thing does to you. I don't know. I respect your accomplishments so much, Shelly.
Thank
And
you.
I know you're
Thank you.
continuing. I mean, you've got a great, we didn't even get to the Cure Alliance, but it's a nonprofit group she's got going with scientists and researchers, and they're trying to end suffering by developing cures for fatal diseases. So on and on the effort to improve our world goes. We'll continue to watch it, and our love to David too, who emerges as the gentle hero of the story.
We've got,
oh my God,
we've got Katie Kirk's book coming out.
Oh my God, you're booked. Consider yourself booked. Wow, there's a lot more to go
We've
over.
got a lot to talk about.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Wow. What an exchange. I need to have dinner with her, not just, this wasn't enough. Listen, up next, we're going to get to another great journalist whose name is Katie Herzog, and we're going to talk about how women are being erased from scientific conversations. It's actually getting really kind of scary now, including in the medical field, to the danger of those patients involved. And what do you think about Shelley's allegations against Chris Cuomo? Should he be fired? Call me at 833-44-MEGYN, MEGYN. That's 833-446-3496. Welcome back to the Megyn Kelly Show, everyone. Joining me now, journalist Katie Herzog. She's the host of the Blocked and Reported podcast, which I really recommend, and a writer on Substack and other publications. And she's been doing incredible reporting on how woke ideology is spreading in the medical industry and what that means for doctors, nurses, and all the rest of us. Katie, great to have you here again.
Thanks so much for having me back, Megyn.
Okay, so you were sort of a visiting fellow on Barry Weiss's Substack, and wrote this barn burner of a report after speaking to a woman, I think you called her Lauren in the piece, who's a med student at a top medical school, who was telling you how concerned she was about woke ideology infecting medicine. I mean, actual science, in a way that is really disturbing, including no longer willing to acknowledge the very real differences in health issues between men and women, something women and their advocates have been trying to push for greater attention to for decades.
Yeah, that's sort of the irony here, is that after decades of women arguing that our health issues are not focused on, there's now this unfortunately sort of progressive movement away from that, where gender identity it's become this sacrosanct concept. So gender identity has become more important in some places than biological sex. Mm-hmm. And so the student I spoke to, this was at a top school at the University of California system. She told me that her professors will essentially get shamed by their own students if they talk about biological sex. And she had lots of documentation to back this up. She sent me audio of a professor profusely apologizing to his students for offending his students. He sounded like he was about to cry. And the offensive term that he used in his lecture was pregnant women.
So absurd. And it's not just him, because just this week we saw the CDC use the term pregnant people. All the media seems to be going along with it now. I saw you tweet out something like, is this like a new style acceptance that we're no longer going to use the term women anymore, anywhere? Because it was NPR, I think ABC, a few publications just went along with it.
A lot of publications have gone along with it, and it's happened remarkably quickly. It sort of reminds me of the adoption of the term Latinx, and there's been polling on that term, and most people who are considered Latinx by the media either don't know what that term is or don't like that term. Right. And I think the same thing is happening here. And I haven't seen any polling on the term pregnant people versus pregnant women, but just intuitively, there is something very bizarre about this erasure of women within women's health. And yes, Right. It's not just the CDC, it's not just the media, it's organizations like Planned Parenthood, which, should be able to use the term women without consequence. It's very strange.
So it's to the point of like the danger that's being posed now. This is, I think this is from your report. In 2019, the New England Journal of Medicine reported the case of a 32-year-old transgender man so biological female. Yeah. Who went to an ER complaining of abdominal pain. And tell us what happened.
So this patient was assessed as an obese man suffering from complications of hypertension. He'd quit taking his hypertension medication because he identified himself as a trans man. His practitioners, the nurses in charge of him, they didn't realize, this woman in particular didn't realize what was going on. And it turned out he was pregnant. And by the time they figured out what was happening, it was too late and the baby was gone. And according to this report in the New England Journal of Medication, while this man had no idea that he was pregnant, he was really devastated by this. And something sort of the opposite of that has happened recently. A trans person is suing a hospital because a trans man is suing a hospital because he was given a pregnancy test, and this
is in Rochester, New York, right? This is near my neck of the woods.
Yeah, so this was considered very offensive to him, and I can understand. So
he's a biological female. He's in the hospital, but he lives his life as a man, and they want to give him a pregnancy test.
Right. And this patient says that his practitioners didn't use his preferred pronouns. I think that's wrong. But if there's not an acknowledgement of biological sex, practitioners are going to miss things. Things are different with men and women when it comes to medication. Dosages are different from different medications. Symptoms are different from different conditions. A female heart attack doesn't look like a male heart attack. And so in a case like this, you can see why the practitioners would want to give everybody who is a female person a pregnancy test, because if you're, like, let's say undergoing anesthesia, they need to know, and it can be a liability for these doctors if somebody ends up being pregnant. So I think there's a pretty easy solution here. Really, you can respect people's gender identity, you can respect their pronouns, you can call them the name and the pronouns that they want, but you also need to indicate what their biological sex is.
Yes.
And my wife is a nurse in Seattle, and at her hospital, they have stopped marking down biological sex on intake forms. So what you get is gender identity. It's incredibly dangerous. And the thing is, like, this is done out of, I think, some real sensitivity. People are trying to be inclusive. They're trying to do the right thing, but there are consequences to this. And these consequences could end up hurting trans people, which is going to have the opposite of the intended effect.
Well, and even if you took the hardcore attitude of, well, it's only the trans community that's going to hurt itself by imposing these crazy rules on people. Right. It's not true. So, because first of all, the activists do not speak for the majority of trans people who are kind and loving and don't want to follow all these nonsense rules or make the rest of us do it. And the second thing is, what about that baby? Do we care about the baby who died because of this crazy PC nonsense? Yes, we do. You know, I have to say, Katie, a couple years ago, I had an ovarian cyst and it had to come out. And they said, we're going to take a look. And if it's, wrapped around the ovary, we'll take the ovary too. And I said, why don't you take both ovaries? Because then, I don't have to worry about ovarian cancer. And he said, that would put you into early menopause. And Doug said, the ovary stays. Because apparently you can worry about your sex drive going down if you go to early menopause. Anyway, so then the doctor said to me, he was a cancer OBGYN doc, and he said, one thing I would recommend is while we're in there, we should take the fallopian tubes if you're done having your kids, because the research shows that virtually all of the most pernicious forms of ovarian cancer start in your tubes, in your fallopian tubes. I'm like, take them. I'm done. I'm so done. Yeah. And so I don't have any fallopian tubes. To this day, if I have to go in for some procedure, I still have to give him a pregnancy test. Yeah. I don't have any fallopian tubes.
I'm a lesbian. I can tell them there is absolutely no chance that that I am pregnant. But you can see from a doctor's perspective why the pregnancy test would be. It's a liability. If I can tell a doctor, I'm a lesbian, and what if it turns out that I had a little tryst on the side and I'm pregnant, and something happens, and then I sue the doctor. This is a pregnancy test is also not that invasive. It's a P test. It's not like a blood test. It's a P test.
It's crazy that we're skipping that out of a PC desire for for biological women who are presenting as men, trans men.
Right. And there's the thing is, within trans activism, and as you mentioned, this is not the majority of trans people. There are a small number of basically hyper online trans people who are sort of pushing this. They do not speak for the majority of trans people at all. Most trans people acknowledge their own biological sex. The thing that makes them trans is that they're trying to appear and live as the opposite sex. But you still have to acknowledge your biological sex. You still have to take the medications every week or every 2 weeks or whatever. You get the surgeries. But there is this ideology that it sounds ridiculous to even say this, but this idea that that you are what you say that you are. So if I say that I am a trans man, that means I am male. I am literally male, which is just, it is ahistorical nonsense.
It's not true. It's not true. You can be respectful of somebody who is trans without signing on to that nonsense. And this,
Right.
can you speak to, this is what Lauren was trying to say to you as a med student, that she knows that there are medical differences between men and women, like where women are more prone to X and men are more prone to whatever. Heart disease is one of the things, a heart attack presents differently in a biological woman than it does in a biological man. But like she was making the point, I don't have the time to, on my own, every single disease they present us with, do the extra layer of, now let me on my own figure out how it affects a man and a woman differently. And then when I meet patients, spend the extra time trying to figure out, because it's not on the chart, finding out whether they have a biological, a different sex than how they're presenting.
Yeah, she was very concerned about this because she feels like in her school, and I should say this is just one program at one school. I did hear from other students after the piece was published that confirmed this, and other medical schools around the country. But the piece really focused on this one school, and she was concerned that she isn't getting instruction she needs on differences, on how things present differently among the sexes. And I can see why her professors would avoid this, because their students act like little Stasi. I mean, they have these online messaging platforms where they give the instructors real-time feedback while they lecture. And if a lecturer says something problematic, and that can be, yes, using terms like male and female, the students will complain about it. They had multiple petitions within the last year of this program, trying to basically reform these teachers, their language use. So
and they're doing it. It's working.
They're doing it, and they're doing it. Yes. They are scared of their students. Yes.
You've got the National Institutes of Health, the CDC, Harvard Medical School, all trying now to make the effort to divorce biological sex from gender identity, and emphasize on gender identity. Both matter. Yeah. You got the American Psychological Association deeming terms like natal sex, birth sex, disparaging. Now it's only assigned sex at birth, as though biological sex is not relevant and maybe even offensive.
Right. And you can imagine a situation. So now in many states, maybe all states, I'm not sure about that. So you can get your sex marker changed on your birth certificate and on your driver's license. So let's say a trans person gets in a car accident and is unconscious and goes to an ER. And then the ER, the first responders there, the ER, all they have is this driver's license. If the person has had surgeries to look like a male or a female or whatever, they might not even realize the actual biological sex of the person that they're working on, because this official ID says that you are this thing that you believe that you are.
And again, go back to what happened to that baby. That baby died because they were unwilling to probe further. So we need to care. I mean, this is a problem, and it's a problem even in the psychiatric field now too. More and more therapists are coming out and saying all people's problems are supposed to be attributed to identity. It's no longer about, Katie, what'd you go through? Did you have a pain in the ass mother? Oh, well, let's blame her. It's now all about, well, you're white, so you're an oppressor, so that's probably the root of your depression.
Right. And we should be careful not to generalize too much. Therapists vary as much as any other field. But yes, there is this trend within the field of mental health to attribute, especially among young natal females, teen girls, to attribute various, you go in complaining of some problem, and then all of a sudden you're diagnosed with gender dysphoria. And this isn't the first time we've seen these trends throughout history. There was, during the 1980s and 1990s, therapists were integral into the spread of the repressed memory craze, which was widely debunked, but had all of these terrible consequences, not just convincing people that they underwent horrific abuse, but also people actually went to jail. So yeah, it makes me very, very cautious to ever see a therapist personally.
I know.
You don't want to leave with more problems than you came in with.
Well, we've talked about this, and I talked about it with Abigail Schreier, and I know you're familiar with her work, but she pointed out how parents who have a child who presents as trans, who never presented as trans before, it's always a girl who's 15, who was never, no signs at all. And then a couple of her friends say that they're non-binary or whatever it is. And suddenly their daughter's like, well, maybe I'm trans. Abigail was sounding the alarm on be careful, because the new standard in the psychiatric field is affirm. Right. And I've seen some of your reporting dovetail with that like, people go, and the first thing they're told is, yes, your kid's actually a boy. And the parents are like, wait, she got bullied. It could be any one of a number of things.
Right, right. It's a real problem. And the standards of this have actually have literally changed. So what the recommendations now are it's called affirmative consent. So you basically tell a patient, tell the parents, there's some possibility you'll regret this, but you don't necessarily have to explore other issues of what might be going on, maybe issues with someone's sexual orientation or depression or anxiety, or just like being a teen girl, which is difficult. And teen girls are notoriously prone to social contagion and peer pressure. But it's become this sort of progressive, not just talking point, but this dogma that if someone comes and they say, I am trans, you cannot inspect that. You cannot ask them what else is going on. You just have to accept this. And this is part of this is a backlash to very real gatekeeping within this field. So for decades, if you wanted to transition, you had to live as your preferred sex, your preferred gender for 2 years before you were given things like hormones or surgery. That can be very onerous. And so this is the opposite of this. This is the backlash. The reaction to this is to basically take away all gatekeeping. And for some people, that's gonna be better. It's gonna have good outcomes. But for some people, it's not. And there's gonna be a certain number of false positives who regret this.
Well, and meanwhile, they're performing mastectomies on girls as young as 13. 13 double mastectomies. So it's called top surgery because we want to pretend that somebody absolutely has gender dysphoria. And as soon as they express it, that's what it really is. And we don't need to look further. And the reality is that the vast majority, I mean, I've seen it, you tell me, but I've seen any place between 60% and 90% of kids who have gender dysphoria grow out of it, and a very large percentage of them, if left to their own devices and not perform surgery or gender hormones or any of that, turn out to be gay or lesbian.
I would have been one of those kids. I was a classic tomboy and grew up to be a lesbian. If I had been born 20 years later, I might be talking to you as a they, them. Right? I probably wouldn't be talking to you right now, but I might be a non-binary or trans right now. And you're right. There's lots of studies that back up that the statistic varies, but the majority of kids, if sort of left to their own devices, will eventually grow out of this. That said, if you start transitioning, if you start on hormone blockers or social transitioning, that number changes. So people who start to go down this path are much likely to, the term is desist, but much less likely much less likely to grow out of it if they're given some sort of medical intervention.
Mm-hmm. You've been doing great reporting on how if you do puberty blockers into cross-gender hormones, you will be infertile. You can have all sorts of other problems, but just the puberty blockers can be really problematic when it comes to, let's say it's a girl who thinks suddenly that she's actually a boy. She takes puberty blockers. It's going to affect her height, right? Forevermore. Like other unforeseen consequences. These are not harmless drugs.
Right. One of the clinicians I talked to told me that, and this person is skeptical of youth transition, so keep that in mind. But one of the clinicians I talked to said, the last thing that you want to do, if a girl wants to appear to be a man, the last thing that you want to do is make her shorter. Right. And so the main puberty blocker that is given to natal females is Lupron, which is a drug that's used to treat prostate cancer. And Lupron has been used, it's an off-label use, but it's been used for precocious puberty. So girls who, let's say, get their periods are 8 or 9 years old, it's been prescribed to them for a long time. And so we can look at the side effects of this. There's bone density issues. As you mentioned, there's fertility issues. And we just don't have good evidence that there aren't going to be long-term side effects for people who are using this now. And it's being prescribed, and we don't have great data on this, but just anecdotally, it's being prescribed just much more widely than it probably should be.
Yeah, like candy, because the standard is affirm. All right, I want to ask you about some other reporting that you've been doing on a story that's been in the news. And to your credit, as usual, you're not afraid to push back against the narrative, capital T, capital N, we're being fed by some in the press. There is a story. Okay, this is not the Amy Cooper story where she was walking the dog in Central Park and she got into a confrontation with a black man also by the name of Cooper, and they call her Central Park Karen. She lost her job. This is a different story about a white woman and a black couple, and I think it also involves a dog. So can you just set it up for us and set it up what happened?
Dogs are the problem. Stay away from dog parks. That's the message here. So this happened in sort of ironically named McCarran Park in New York. This was a couple of weeks ago. A woman named Emma Sarley got into a confrontation with a man named Frederick Joseph, and the confrontation was over his dog, which she thought was being aggressive. Frederick Joseph he's an influencer. He's an author. He does marketing. He does content creation. He has 100,000 followers on Twitter. And he has this long history of turning what he perceives as racial aggressions into content. So if you look back into his tweets, like he posted a tweet some time ago, he took a picture of a woman on an airplane with her feet up on the seat back in front of her. And he said that this was a United flight. He said that the flight attendant asked this woman to take her feet down, and she refused, and the flight attendant offered her $1,000. That United offered this woman $1,000 to do this. Anybody who has flown, they make you pay to like put your baggage in the overhead. They make you pay to have a seatbelt at this point. No airline is going to. And this is not in first class. No airline is going to do this. So he does stuff like this. He posted another photo of a man also on an airplane, a white man laying he had 3 seats to himself. So he's just laying down on the airplane. And Frederick Joseph said, a black man would never be able to do this. I don't know any airline who would enforce that. That's just not a rule, right? So he has this history. He, at one point, he stayed in an Airbnb, and he accused the Airbnb of having all of this Satanist iconography, made it into a huge viral story. So this is what he does. And in this particular case, he whipped out his phone during this confrontation, or after the confrontation with this woman, and he said, "Did you say to stay in my neighborhood?" And she said yes. The woman, frankly, appeared to be a little bit drunk. Her behavior was also erratic and sort of bizarre. And so he films this, and then he puts this online, and he says,
okay, now let me pause you there. Because I think we have, So the moment she allegedly says the thing about your hood or your neighbor, that's not on camera, but the aftermath is. Let's watch it.
Stay in our hood? No.
I'm gonna invite everyone.
Stay in our hood? Stay in our hood. I'm sorry, what? Stay in our hood? Stay in our hood. You just told us to stay in our hood? You just told us to leave the dog park and stay in our hood.
Oh my God, did you just say that to me? Shit.
Wow. Oh, that's funny.
Wow, the Karen is in the white.
I'm sorry, you were right here, watch this entire thing. Did she just not stand here and tell us to stay in our hood?
She did.
You just told us to stay.
Okay, go ahead, pick it up.
Okay, so he takes that clip and he puts it online, shows it to his hundreds of thousands of followers, and he directs his followers to find this woman. They go and do it. And then he figures out where she works, and he tags her employer, and she is fired within a couple of hours. So Camille Foster really did some incredible reporting on this, and he interviewed witnesses. And what he found was that during this confrontation, Frederick Joseph said that he lived in Long Island City. So this wasn't his neighborhood. So it sounds as though what she's saying is go back to she probably shouldn't have used the word hood. Probably she might have been mirroring his language. I'm not sure, but she probably should, just like stay away from that term. She wasn't saying like go back to the ghetto, but apparently what she was saying
hood and the hood are two different things.
Right. Like this is our dog park, and at our dog park, we don't do this. Go back to your dog park. So Camille Foster found this out. And he also realized something pretty incredible here. So CBS local news, they interviewed some witnesses as well as Frederick Joseph. Apparently, the witness, as well as Frederick Joseph, said this in the interview. They both said this. He said, "I live in Long Island City." She said, go back to your hood," or we'll stay in your hood. CBS local news cut that part of the interview. Why would they do it? Well, it's less salacious that way. So Camille got in touch with the reporter. The reporter refused to talk to him. He called the station. Nobody would talk to him. They just have completely not answered to the fact that they left out this crucial bit of information. Now, is Emma racist? It's totally possible. I have no idea. But the question is, should she have been fired from her job immediately because of this 30-second video, out of context video, where nobody really knew what happened to lead up to this conflict?
Oh my gosh. This is and she was fired because he made a point of tagging her employer. I mean, this guy clearly wanted her fired. Contrast that with the Central Park situation where the guy, though there are problems with that story too, at least he came out publicly and said, okay, I don't know that she should be fired over this and have her whole life ruined. This guy was like, let's ruin her. Let's get her.
Right.
And
Right. Well,
even
he
Nicole
benefits from
Hannah
this.
Jones, you know,
Yeah.
of the 1619 Project in the New York Times came out and was like, I don't know if I'm okay with this whole let's fire everybody and let's fire this girl. And I mean, but they did it. She lost her job.
Yeah. And then the CEO, of course, got dogpiled for that because as many people who thought he did the right thing and probably an equal number of people thought that he did the wrong thing. So he should have he shouldn't have said a word. He should have just backed up and like kept this internal. And, there's another question here, which is why are our bosses adjudicating what we do outside of work? I find that really deeply uncomfortable.
Right.
If my employees, like my co-host Jesse Single, if my employee is doing something outside of work that I object to, is it my business to regulate his behavior? Should I just, should I call his girlfriend? Should I call his dad and tell on him? It just doesn't make any sense. And there are, of course, going to be exceptions to this. If somebody is like, has like a dog fighting ring in their basement or something, that might not
if
be
it's a crime, sure,
Right,
that's a different story.
Right. But for these interpersonal interactions that really shouldn't be, this is a fight in a dog park, right? And not even a very big fight. These interpersonal interactions should really just be ignored or solved between the people. This doesn't need to be something that you run to the boss. I mean, ironically, what Frederick Joseph did is the quintessential Karen move. He called the manager.
That's right. You're exactly right. But there's no grace. And forget, this guy is an activist, clearly, who just wants to get people fired and sort of cause trouble. That's obvious based on what you've just told us. But for the employer to not take a moment and say, yeah, obviously she was intoxicated, which, by the way, is not illegal. And right. People do stupid things when they get drunk and they say stupid things. And maybe she meant to say neighborhood. Who the hell knows? You can't tell. But like, what did the investigation show? Did they bother to do one, or did they just can her?
I mean, it was too fast. She was fired within hours. There's no way that they could have conducted any sort of real investigation. And the thing for Emma is that she seems like a young woman. This will haunt her for the rest of her life. This will be at the top Google results for the rest of her life, unless she hires one of these, services that cost $100,000 and they'll push your Google results down to page 2 or whatever. But this will haunt her.
Look into that.
Yeah.
Abby, make a note.
Big business.
They're going to be working all the time for me. But you know what? It's kind of the same thing. Like that employer is doing the same thing that those professors who are self-editing in the medical schools who are not true believers are doing. They're just bowing to the woke mob because they're afraid. They don't have anything close to a steel spine. And they're just as complicit in the erosion of grace and kindness and understanding that humanity is complicated as the angry activists who I'm fighting against on this program are.
Yeah, it's fear. And I'm empathetic towards them because, if you have thousands of people calling for this woman's head, it takes incredible resilience to not listen to them, especially if you're a business, especially if, this could hurt your bottom line. If customers are calling you and saying, you have to fire this woman, I can understand why people would do that. But there needs to be some grace period. There needs to be some way to resolve these, because the story that emerges online with almost anything, with a 30-second video clip is much more complicated, much more nuanced than what we're led to believe. Mm-hmm. And people should remember this after the Covington story, and then immediately after that, the Jussie Smollett story. But there's this need to sort of act immediately that really doesn't serve people.
Katie Herzog, such great reporting, as always. We love Camille, too, one of the co-hosts of the Fifth Column. He was on the show not long ago, and so we'll keep an eye on his reporting as well. Great to see you. Thank you for being here.
You too. Thanks for having me.
Up next, we're taking your calls. Would love to know your thoughts on Chris Cuomo. You think he'll address Shelley's allegations? Will CNN? Will Brian Stelter ever? Do they give a damn? What about Katie's reporting? Are you in the medical community dealing with these issues, or what do you think about this guy at the dog park trying to get this woman's job? Call me, 833-44-MEGYN, MEGYN. That's 833-446-3496. Phone lines are open, everyone. Call me, 833-44-MEGYN. That's 833-446-3496. We're going to take our first caller out of Brooklyn, New York. Hey, Brooklyn, what's your thought?
Hey, Megan, how are you? I just want to say thank you so much for providing some truth and substance in an era of media that you rarely see that being done today, especially on a program that's CNN, which My God, that Chris Cuomo, what a terrible guy that is. Huh?
Oh,
I mean, he had his brother on, you know, when the governor was doing well. He was so loved. And then next thing you know, 13, 14, 15 women come out, accuse him of sexual harassment. Chris Cuomo didn't say one thing about his brother, not one thing at all, because you knew that he had some skeletons in his closet as well. So, and Shelly, what an interview today. Shelly seems pretty credible. She seems pretty credible. I'm telling you, Megyn. So, hey, thank you for providing her a platform. CNN has been horrible lately. I mean, the truth is just not there. Brian Stelter, don't get me started on that guy either. But Megyn, geez, thank you so much, because CNN's just been ridiculous.
well, thank you for calling in with your thoughts. It really does bother me because you know very well that it's a double standard. And if this had been one guy at Fox, Brian Stelter would have been writing all about it. And, you know, Chris Cuomo's got a pattern of bullying nonstop, and I'm really kind of sick of it. And I think a lot of people are. All right, I'm going to squeeze in one more caller before we go. Jiffy quick, Nancy in Indiana. What are your thoughts?
Megyn, I just can't tell you how much I enjoy your podcast. Listen to them every time. But I was wondering, do you think you'll ever interview Megyn or Melania Trump or Donald?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I would love to interview them. I'd love to talk to Melania because I haven't done that yet. And Trump is a news-making machine. So, yes, I predict we'll get him on the podcast and the show at some point soon. Thank you for listening. Thank you all for listening. Tomorrow, one of my favorite people, Victor Davis Hanson is here. John Stossel, too. And guess what? Ben Smith of the New York Times, who broke that story on Aussie Media, which is now imploded, he's coming on. So don't miss that. Check out our show at youtube.com/Megyn Kelly. We'll see you tomorrow.